your views on, for instance, things that could stifle, for instance, the female sex drive. And I'm just curious, perhaps if you have any thoughts about, is this kind of a patriarchal shutdown of the female sex drive, or could this perhaps be driven by other women in terms of, intersex competition and discussions amongst women? Do you have kind of any thoughts about that?
Oh, yes, we published a big paper on that. I worked on this one with Jean Twenge, who was a very staunch feminist, but also a solid researcher. He said, let's look. Most societies control female sexuality more than male, which would be if society has to control sex to some degree. Otherwise, you have babies no one's taken care of and other problems. Since the female sex drive is more flexible, that would be the logical place to control it. Um, Although it turns out there are a lot more laws aimed at male sexuality than female. Most of the laws about sex you prosecute men and not women. But in terms of restraining the young woman's sexual activity, found in lots of cultures, I thought this was going to be a big mess. I'd done a lot of literature reviews, and I knew this was going to be complicated with all contrary things. But no, actually, it lined up very simply and clearly. The suppression of female sexuality came almost entirely from the women. It was very little sign of any influence from the men. I mean, you mentioned patriarchy, and I'm not sure patriarchy even exists. Um, I mean, it's something people talk about as a bugaboo, but I mean, I'm 71 years old. I can't recall a single conversation in my entire life when I talk to other men about how can we restrain women or oppress them or hold them down. You know, if there's a patriarchy, they never reached out to me. Um, but but in terms of restraining sexuality, it's something that women do, and that's everything from the bad reputation and ostracizing the young woman who goes farther than whatever the local norm is, to those genital surgery things they do in some cultures where they do some kind of cutting or sewing to restrict the female genitals. That's all entirely run by women, and men are sometimes opposed to it. Um, I even read there was a big study of men, I think in the Sudan, where they were Muslim, and so they had multiple wives, including one woman who had had the surgery and one woman who had not, one wife who had not. And almost without exception, they preferred having sex with the woman with the intact genitals, which stands to reason. It's just much nicer to have intercourse with a woman who's enjoying it than for whom it is painful. So our understanding of it is sort of led to a supply and demand kind of thing, and in many cultures, women didn't really have much economic role. And so, how is a young woman to set herself up for life? Well, sex was the main thing she had to offer for it. I first read this. It was Nancy Cott, a feminist historian, talking about the suppression of female sexuality during the Victorian period, which was exceptionally prudish. Um, and she said, well, the Industrial Revolution had taken away most of women's traditional economic roles, like making clothes. I mean, the textile industry was one of the leaders of the Industrial Revolution, canning food and all those things. And so the woman was kind of economically obsolete in the 1800s. And as Cott said, well, if sex is your only asset, then you need the price to be as high as possible. So like with any monopoly tactic, you restrict the supply, and that makes the price go higher. And so women put pressure on each other to restrict sexuality so that men will be willing to make a lifetime commitment to support her. Um, when what she's mainly offering is sex. Um, so that appeared to be it. Women were like OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting countries that periodically restrict how much oil they put on the world market to maintain the price being high. And it works about as well, which is sometimes, but not consistently. Um, anyway, that's what we found. And again, my co-author was a staunch feminist. I know some feminists don't like these ideas, but she said, no, this shows women taking charge of their situation and being agentic and using their sexuality to control men, and they need to restrain each other because men, it seems, this is not a very nice way to put it, but my impression is men will do whatever they have to get sex and not a lot more. And so you look at changes in the sex ratio, and there are a lot more women than men, then there's plenty of premarital and extramarital sex, and the men don't make that many commitments and things like that. When there's a shortage of women, a lot more men, then it's a very prudish kind of environment, and there's not much extramarital sex, and the man knows if he loses his woman, he probably won't get another. So he's willing to make the permanent commitment. Um, I, I, I taught a graduate seminar on sex along with a couple other colleagues, and one of them was older, and he had gotten his PhD around 1960, and he said, "Yeah, back then we all married in college because it was the only way to get sex, but hardly anyone gets married in college anymore." Um, Actually, they do. I'm here in Utah, where the LDS, the Mormon Church, is still very strong, and they are against premarital sex, and so a lot of the students do indeed get married while they're still undergraduates, because, well, that's the only way it can happen. So, like I said, the men will do what they need to, and the women respond to that. Um, and controlling each other's sexuality uh, is important for that, so that women can't be stealing each other's men, and the woman can have as much sex as she wants without thinking that, well, if I don't give him sex tonight, he'll go find somebody else.